And as you mentioned, it was a huge, it's a huge difference from being, an investment banker and you go to being an assistant basketball coach. And every one of my friends thought I was having a nervous breakdown when actually it was part of a bigger plan. And there were no guarantees that I would have been successful. Princeton really was an important transformational place for me, right? It changed my life, right? I'm again from the south side of Chicago, two parents who didn't go to college. And so here I end up with the Bucks working in the front office, and then that job gets me an even bigger job with the Knicks, where I'm running all of player development. I'm the general manager of the G League team. And it gets back to your point. I mean, I started out trying to be a high school basketball coach.
1, 2, 3.
Pull on and be ballin' for all y'all to see. Pull on and be ballin' for all y'all to see.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Go With The Flow. I have another very, very special guest with me as part of this alumni series, Mr. Craig Robinson, class of 1983. And I'll just give a short little background. He graduated from Princeton in 1983 with a degree in sociology. He was a member of the varsity basketball team where he was two-time Ivy League Player of the Year. He was drafted by the 76ers, played overseas for 2 years before deciding to get his MBA in finance from University of Chicago. He worked as a bond trader and investment banker in the 90s before leaving to pursue his passion in basketball, where he was an assistant at Northwestern for 6 years, head coach at Brown University for 2 years, and then Oregon State for 6 years. He worked as an analyst for ESPN and then was the Bucks vice president of player and organizational development for 1 year before filling the same role at the Knicks. And he now serves as the executive director of the National Association of Basketball Coaches. So welcome to the show, Mr. Robinson.
Well, Falarin, thanks for having me on, man. And thanks for that wonderful introduction. You got everything in the right sequence.
I love that. So the first place that I actually wanted to start with was your entrance into the career of finance. So like I mentioned, you were drafted by the Sixers and spent some years playing overseas. When did you know that it was the right time to leave basketball and then pursue something else? And why was finance the route that you decided that you wanted to take?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, once I got cut from the Sixers, I thought that was going to be the end of my career, right? Because back then the G League wasn't as it was actually called the CBA back then, and it wasn't as robust as it is today. And it was very few guys who made it from the CBA into the NBA. So I was very prepared to sort of just go start looking for a job. And but fortunately, while I was looking, I got an offer to play over in England, in Manchester, England. And I did that for 2 seasons. And after the second season, I thought to myself, I could stay over here and do this for 10 years, but is that something I really wanted to do? And at the time, I didn't know I wanted a career in sports. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, because I was one of those kids who came to Princeton from a place where neither one of my parents went to college. My dad worked for the city. My mom was a secretary at a bank. So I didn't have sort of a preordained path on where to go. So I started just looking around and ended up interviewing at Sears Roebuck, which has closed down now, but it used to be where it used to own Dean Witter Reynolds, which was a stock brokerage firm. And that was my first foray into finance. So I started out as a stockbroker and realized that this was an opportunity. You could make a lot of money just by talking to people on the phone. And once I got a taste of that, then I realized there was this whole other aspect of finance on the institutional side, because a stockbroker was back then was sort of called retail finance, where you talk to individuals. And then I saw the institutional side, but every Black person who was on the institutional side had an MBA. And if I wanted to do that, I had to go back to school. And that's when I decided to go back and get my MBA.
Yeah. And was that when you were deciding that you maybe didn't want to stay in basketball any longer, would you say that was a moment of crisis for you, since that was basketball is probably one of a constant in your life up until that point?
Flo, I got to tell you, I didn't feel like any stress, right? I knew it wasn't a crisis. It wasn't a fear. I just knew I had to get a job at some point, right? So I knew it was coming. And that while basketball was a big part of my life all the way up until then, you have to remember back in the 80s, most people didn't try and make it to the NBA. I know I didn't. I was just fortunate, right? I was using basketball to get an education, and my parents had a lot to do with that. But I also realized, there weren't a lot of teams back then. The money in the NBA wasn't what it is today. So, I looked at it as just the next step. While I loved basketball, I just looked at it as the next step. In my career. So when I decided to start looking for a corporate job or a regular job, there wasn't any fear, there wasn't any trepidation. The only thing I was worried about was finding something that I'd be interested in doing.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, sounds like a lot of us nowadays too, when we're trying to decide what it is that we want to do. I was someone who was pre-med for a year and a half before I then decided that I wanted to do something else. And I would also say it was just the concern about finding something that I'd actually be interested in. And I like to think that I found that right now. So very, very excited for the next step. And so
Right.
when you began your work as a bond trader and then eventually got into investment banking, what do you think it was that was able to let you have such a successful career in the 90s? Was it something you learned at Princeton? Was it something you learned on the basketball court? How do you think you were able to have such a successful career there?
That's a really good question. And I know I know what I think it was. There were a couple of things. One, it was my parents were hard workers, right? So I grew up in a house where both my parents went to work, and my dad had MS, so he was disabled and got up and went to work every day. So we had no excuse, right? We were up and following in behind our parents. So we grew up as hard workers. So that's the first thing. That helped me be successful in just about everything I've done. But the second thing, I'll attribute it to basketball, and it is knowing how to work within a team environment, right? Not everybody gets to be on a team, especially on a professional team. But being just growing up playing sports, being on teams, understanding what sacrifice was, understanding what giving of yourself for others, encouraging people who aren't doing as well as you are, facing adversity, all those things happen in a team environment. And I think that more than anything has allowed me to feel comfortable in corporate situations, and especially when I was working on Wall Street in the finance area, where it can be very clubby, it can be very sort of secular, but having played on teams, I was able to go in and fit in and sort of figure it out early on in my career.
Yeah, and even just pausing right there, since we're on basketball and just taking it back to your time at Princeton, I see that you're still very involved in the university. I remember you were involved in the baccalaureate procession and the commencement procession. Why is that why is that a role, and why is your level of involvement where it is?
Well, I feel like Princeton really was an important transformational place for me, right? It changed my life, right? I'm again from the south side of Chicago, two parents who didn't go to college and ended up at a place like Princeton, and it literally changed our lives. And so I am active at Princeton because I feel that there are other sort of people who are coming in kind of like I did, and I want to be a role model. I want to be an asset. I want to be a resource to them and help them understand how great a place Princeton is and how important it can be in your overall development.
Yeah, and I think I was definitely able to realize that and appreciate that, at least in my last 2 years. I don't know if as much when I was pre-med and not loving my classes as much, but I
Right.
would definitely say when you get to the point where you're in your junior and senior year and you're seeing all the different opportunities that are available to you because you go to Princeton, you have certain firms come and recruit at only places like Princeton. I think
Right.
then that's the point where a lot of myself and my peers start to finally appreciate exactly what Princeton is.
And it happens at different times for people, because just like you said, when you first get there, you're in hyper competitive mode. Even if you're not playing a varsity sport or a club sport, you feel like you're competing with the best of the best, but the competition was actually getting in. Once you get there, the sooner you find your sweet spot and stop worrying about the other folks who are there, and find your spot, that's when you start to thrive. And it's for that reason, my experience makes me want to share any part of my success with those who are coming up behind me, because Princeton really is a wonderful place. And the sooner that we as young Black people, and you as young Black folks, realize what it can do and how it change you, the better.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. And so you spent a little bit of time in finance, and then this is a lot of my questions are going to be about the points when you decide to change career, because as
Sure.
someone who's just about to enter the workforce, I'm thinking, okay, how long will I stay in one role? When will I know that it's the right time to leave? And so when you had spent the 90s in finance, when did you then decide that it was time to do something else and go pursue a career in basketball? Because I think I read somewhere that you realized you'd be taking a significant pay cut. It would be a different
Right.
way of life. So why was it the right time again for you to then leave finance and go into basketball?
So for Lauren, I would say, when I first got in there, I had no idea what investment banking, sales and trading. I didn't know the finance. I didn't know the institutional finance enterprise at all. Right. The only thing I knew about finance coming out of Princeton was I had a bank account at Princeton and how to write checks and things like that. I knew that, you had to get loans to buy a house, that kind of stuff, but that was the extent of my expertise. And then once I got involved and I saw the vast amount of capital that was going through the system and how much money you could make, I was like, I'm in this for real. Right. And so right away, coming from the place I came from, I couldn't see that sustaining for a long period of time. Right. That's what happens when you grow up without a whole lot. You think, okay, you have this opportunity, you got to take advantage of it because it's going to go away. So I had always had the plan of working as long as it took me to pay for my house, to pay for my, expenses, pay off my student loans and all that kind of stuff, save up enough money for my kids' college education. And my plan was to then at, whatever age it would have been, 45, 50, to teach seventh grade and coach high school basketball. That was my sort of exit plan. Now, I didn't have a dollar amount like a lot of people do today, because I didn't know to have a dollar amount, right? I just had a plan, and I knew I didn't want to be encumbered with a whole lot of debt. And I figured as long as I was debt free, I could do anything. I could make 25 grand or I could make 250 grand, but I knew I'd be okay as long as I didn't have this dark cloud of debt hanging over me. So that was my plan. So I'm on my way to sort of fulfilling that goal. And you'll see once you hit Wall Street, the bulk of your compensation comes in a year-end bonus. So each year your bonus is different. So, but you kind of have an idea what you're going to make. And so I spent like 13 years just socking away money. And I wasn't anywhere near the point of, okay, this is the right time. But an opportunity presented itself to me when Coach Bill Carmody, who was a former assistant coach at Princeton, got the head coaching job at Northwestern. He offered me an assistant coaching job at a Division I school. Now, you have to remember, in the back of my mind, I was thinking I would coach in high school and
High
teach
school,
seventh
yeah.
grade. This was like getting the Morgan Stanley job of coaching earlier than you expected. So I had to make a decision on leaving, I shouldn't say leaving, changing my plan from being completely debt free and having a pile of money in the bank to, should I take this risk and do something that I've dreamt of doing, and that was coaching. And so, needless to say, I made the decision to coach. And as you mentioned, it was it's a huge difference from being, an investment banker, and you go to being an assistant basketball coach. And every one of my friends thought I was having a nervous breakdown, when actually it was part of a bigger plan. And there were no guarantees that I would have been successful and all that stuff. But it was something that my dad always said: if you can find a job that you love doing, it won't feel like a job. And he was absolutely right. And that's why I really took the risk to do it. And it just turned out well for me after that. But that was sort of the process of my decision, because it was based on a plan. Like all Princeton folks, I had a plan for the future, and then these opportunities come out of the woodwork, because you have gone to a place like Princeton, and you have to decide whether to take advantage of them or not.
Yeah, and it seems like that's one thing that you can't ever really prepare for, because the opportunities just come out of the woodwork. So there is no blueprint of, when you're doing this thing that's really stable and you get this opportunity, what exactly do you do? And it definitely has to come with a lot of self-reflection and just figuring out exactly what you want to do. But one thing that you mentioned, you said that you got into finance, and you were working to pay off all your debts and to just make sure your kids had they could pay for college. How were you able to be so, I guess, financially responsible in a time when people are not really, and they don't really plan ahead that much? Why was that something that you were able to prioritize, whereas some other people aren't able to do that?
Yeah, because I think it was two things. One, I'm just a natural worrier. That's my personality. But two, I grew up in a house with one parent who had a disability. So you're always concerned with being able to provide for your family, and my dad was able to provide even though he was disabled. So I was always sort of leery about being able to provide. And what my mom and dad did when I was growing up was they taught us how to save money, right? Because you had to, when you don't have much, you had to. And the biggest lesson I learned from him from that standpoint was, he said, look at your bills as if you're a business, and you're paying you're paying rent, you're paying your bills, you have to pay yourself. And he said, always pay yourself first. So you figure out your budget, you figure out what you're going to have left over, and pay yourself part of that and put it in the bank. Just that simple advice was, and I respected my dad tremendously, as you can imagine. So I just did that, right? So in a time when people were so materialistic and they just spent every bit of money they had, I was trained to be a coach, to be a saver, and I've always been that way.
Gotcha. And that's definitely very good advice for all my peers listening, who are, again, going to be making these amounts of money that we probably didn't think we would be making right out of college. And we need to think more about the long term and realize
pay yourself first.
Yeah.
Pay yourself first, and put some money in the bank, and live. I always lived off my draw. And for the audience, the draw is the salary you get while you're waiting to get your bonus at the end of the year. And I never lived past the means of my draw. And then when I got my bonus, if I needed to put a down payment on a house, or I needed to make a big purchase, I always waited to see what my bonus was going to be. But even then, I would pay myself first out of my bonus before I started spending money.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you mentioned, just going back to the coaching again, got the opportunity to be an assistant at Northwestern for 6 years. And then that
Mhm.
opportunity when it comes for you to be a head coach at a Division I school, because you just said in your mind previously, the goal was high school basketball coach, and I've
Yeah.
made it. So when that opportunity comes, what were those feelings like? And why exactly did it feel like the right time for you to go do that?
So that's a really good question, Flo. The reason why I thought um, Brown was the right job for me was because it was the job that I got. Because when you're in coaching, especially Division I coaching, there's only 360 jobs. So you think about that. There's only 360 jobs, and you have, you know, thousands of universities that you can work at, Division I, II, and III, and all of those guys have been coaching for years. So I had started interviewing for jobs probably my 4th year in, and just wasn't getting over the hump, just interviewing, but I was practicing my interviewing skills. And then the Brown job came open and I interviewed, and I really, that was the first time that I thought, this job, I am the ideal candidate. Having gone to an Ivy League school, having gone through the process of being recruited to an Ivy League school, having worked at Northwestern, which is a high academic university, it had everything. In my mind, it had everything. I had everything the job needed, and I think that made me more confident when I went to interview. And that was the job I got offered. So I felt a sense of relief first, because when they made the offer, I was like, whoa, I got an offer. But then secondly, I was thinking, should I wait for something better? And then I thought to myself, there's only 360 of these jobs, and about 40 of them turn over every year. So you think about that. The odds are that you aren't going to be a head coach, right? And so after I felt relief and took the job, then I felt this wave of, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Am I ready to be a head coach? Just like everybody who's up for a promotion. But then I'll go back to a bit of advice I gotten at my days at Morgan Stanley when I started out. And you're an associate and you do that for a few years, and you're starting to figure out, okay, it's about time for me to be considered a vice president. And I asked my manager at the time, who was also a friend of mine, I was like, how do you get promoted to be a vice president? I had no idea. I couldn't ask my dad. I didn't have relatives who were in the business. And you know what he told me, Falarin? He said, act like a vice president. That advice I have carried with me from then until now. And I really believe that helped me get that job, because I started acting like a head coach once I was ready to be a head coach. So to get back to your question, it was a relief at first, and then it was sort of excitement about, okay, all right, this is what you've been asking for, to be a head coach in Division I. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I will just say all these different nuggets of advice that you're dropping, I'm just writing them down because they seem like they're going to be very helpful for myself also. So I'm just entering into the real world.
Feel free, man. Feel free. I'm happy to share them. I'm happy to share them.
Yeah, and so you got the head coaching job at Brown, and you were able to have 2 extremely successful seasons. Did you surprise yourself with how you're able to turn the program around, or were you like, this is an opportunity I've been waiting for? I knew that it was my time to shine.
Well, it was one of those where I knew exactly what to do, because we had to do it at Northwestern. So we turned Northwestern around, and I had a little bit of a blueprint there, and so I wasn't cocky about it, but I knew, hey, if we have players who are willing to work hard, give themselves over to us, and sort of follow our direction, it's all about leadership, right? And I took all the leadership skills that I had learned, put together a good staff. It was a real team effort, and we were successful.
Yeah, and again about the career jump, and I think I'm going to know the answer to this one already, but then moving on to Oregon State, and again, with the point in mind that you always thought it would be high school basketball coach, when you're offered a Power Five conference role, how does it seem like they just keep reaching levels where you just never really expected them to reach? Because again, it's like, okay, assistant, Ivy League, but coaching, being a head coach of a Power Five conference, that's just it's a very big deal.
Yeah, I will tell you, I didn't even know to aspire to that, right? Because when I got my first job, uh, um, full-time job coaching at Northwestern, I asked Coach Carmody, I was like, do you think I have a chance of ever being a head coach? And I was fine being an assistant in the Big Ten. I just didn't know. And I was and I was thinking sort of like a Division III, or somewhere local, like Illinois Tech, or North Park in Chicago. These were all local universities. And he was like, oh yeah, sure, if we do well, you have an opportunity. But so I wasn't, it wasn't until I got into being a head coach when I was like, okay, when these jobs open up, at some point somebody's going to be interested in me and I have to make the decision. And that's what happened with Oregon State. It was just we had 2 really good years. They were a bad team, and they were looking for somebody who could turn the program around, which we did there as well. So I just repeated what I did at Northwestern and Brown with better players.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I think what I'm hearing from your story is just a great message for people to just, you never know where your ceiling is. So you can't set it way too low, because you might think that this is what you're destined for, but in reality, there's something meant for you that is much higher than what you expected.
Exactly. That's a great nugget to take away. And as you can see with my career, at one point I had this grand plan. And then at a certain point, you realize, okay, the plan really isn't yours. It's just the opportunities come from everywhere. What the plan is do I make decisions that makes sense for me?
Yeah, exactly. And then a few years later down the road, you get the opportunity to be the VP of Player and Organizational Development at the Bucks. And so I'm just thinking how, okay, again, high school basketball, and now you're working with the NBA. So first quick question, actually, because you were there when Giannis was still a very young player. When you were there, was the feeling around the building that he would end up being 2-time MVP, NBA champion that he was?
Yeah.
Or has he just surpassed all expectations?
Nope. Everybody knew he was going to be a great player.
Yeah.
And when I got there, he was still sort of moving in that direction, but he didn't need any help with his development. He was such a hard worker. He has such a great spirit about him, and he was very talented. So, and sort of genetics gives you the talent part, right? And he grew up in a poor family and was a hard worker. It was just a matter of time. Just a matter of time. And, again, if you asked me when I first got done playing overseas, I interviewed with the Chicago Bulls and they turned me down. If you had asked me then, I would have said one day I would love to be the general manager of a pro team. But that was it. I didn't see a path to that, right? Because they already told me no, and then I went down the finance path. But you just never know how things work out. And so here I end up with the Bucks working in the front office, and then that job gets me an even bigger job with the Knicks, where I'm running all of player development. I'm the general manager of the G League team, and it gets back to your point. I mean, I started out trying to be a high school basketball coach, and I'm the GM of a pro team, a G League team, albeit, but I'm running all of the development for the Knicks and the Westchester Knicks, and I was about as close to being a GM as I could possibly have ever thought I was going to get to. And it all comes down to just doing well with the opportunity that you have. And then things come your way and you decide whether you should take them or not. Because, there were some other teams that I could have worked for, and I chose the Bucks and then I chose the Knicks only because I thought those were opportunities that where my skills would be needed and used properly.
Yeah, and your story, funny enough, sounds very similar to another alum I had on a few weeks ago, Mark Shapiro, who's the CEO and the president of the Toronto Blue Jays. And he's
Yeah.
someone who was able to get his foot in the doors. That's like in like an intern position with the Cleveland Indians, and then just worked really hard, got recognized, and in about 10, 15 years was GM over there before then going to the Blue Jays. So there's no linear path to any of these types of jobs. So even myself, who has at least a general interest in sports, I'm like, who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
down the road.
I mean, and what I say about a career in sports, you have to be willing to start somewhere and just get in, because that's how you do it. You just get in and don't think about how much money you're making or where you're going. Get in, see where you fit, and then just start grinding.
Yeah. And so since you've had some experience in the NBA and with college, which group of athletes would you say you have more fun working with, college students or professional athletes?
That's a good question. So it's almost the difference is college students are still kids, even though you have some NBA players who are kids, but they are professionals.
Yeah.
So it's a different relationship. I happen to thrive in working with young people, no matter where they are. But I think the biggest impact that I can have is with non-professionals, because most people don't make it to the pros. It's hard to get that point across, and people put all their eggs in the being pro basket without sort of taking care of the other business that you need to be prepared for if you don't make it to the pros. And that's likely. I mean, when I was coaching Falarin, and I was wondering, where are all the NBA players? Like, all these guys who are good enough to be in the NBA, where are they? And then I got into the NBA. They're in the NBA already.
They're there, yeah.
They're in the NBA already.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who the pros are, and they get picked out early.
Yeah.
So most people aren't going to make it. So I think I'm best suited for helping develop young people, to help them understand that while it's great to have dreams, you have to have realities too.
Yeah. And then again, another similar question: which role did you prefer, being a coach on the sidelines or having the front office role?
So I would say, surprisingly, being the coach on the sidelines is great. It was great camaraderie and great relationships, and you had some kind of ability to affect the outcome. When you're in the front office, there's so many people in the organization that are actually going to affect the outcome. I mean, we do by putting the teams together and all that kind of stuff. But once you put the teams together, they still have to practice, perform, win games, have camaraderie, be healthy, all these things that are out of your control. So you're further away from the control. If that bothers you, that's not as fun. For me, I like the sideline coaching, because there are some things you can do that'll help you win a game when you're the coach. There's nothing you can do when you're in the front office to help win a game after you've picked the team.
Yeah. Even in the finals going on right now, Bob Myers is always on the sideline looking very stressed. Brad Stevens also looking very stressed because
no control.
Yeah. And then just two more quick topics that I want to touch on. I forgot to mention earlier that you are a published author. You published your memoir, A Game of Character: A Family Journey from Chicago's South Side to the Ivy League and Beyond, in 2010. What were you able to learn about yourself while going through the process of writing that?
So two things. One, to just be able to put together enough thoughts and have a book that turned out to be halfway decent. And then the other thing was that no one can get to these points in your life, however successful or not, without the help of others. There's no solo players in this. And if you think you are, or people think they are, they're just fooling themselves. There were, in just looking back, I was fortunate to be around some really great people with great character and great integrity that were happy to pour themselves into me and my family. And that was really a tribute to my parents and to those folks.
Yeah. And do you have an interest in writing another book of any sort?
I still have young kids who are in school now, and I did that while I was coaching, so I had it was a lot of work. I could see doing it again, but not until like I'm retired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just
yeah.
the very, very last thing that I wanted to ask you about, in doing my research for this, I stumbled upon a Princeton Alumni Weekly article from 2001 that wrote about how you played basketball with Michael Jordan, pickup basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell the story of how that even happened and what that experience was like?
I sure can. You know, this was when he had retired from the game to play baseball. Actually, no, 2001. So this would have been after the second time he retired.
Yeah, pre-Wizards. Yeah,
pre-Wizards when he was coming back, and he just needed some guys to work out with who were safe to play against, that weren't going to try and kill him. And a couple of John Rogers, who's a Princeton grad, Kit Miller, who's a Princeton grad, Arnie Duncan, and I and another guy, Eric Kuby, played in we played in competitive 3-on-3 tournaments around the country. So we were in shape in our 40s, right? Just enough, sort of his age, where he could trust us. And the guy who worked him out, Tim Grover, asked if we would play pickup with him, and we did. And we played in these quiet games nobody knew about, just to get him back in shape. And it was so much fun. He was such a competitor even then, and such a really neat person to be around. It was fun. It was all the things you could imagine. And we had a little bit to do with him coming back.
Yeah, that's something you could take credit for. If anyone asks, I had a hand to play in MJ coming back and played for the Wizards in 2001. But yeah, Craig Robinson, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a very, very enjoyable podcast.
Yeah, man, you're doing a great job. Keep it up, and I look forward to hearing more of your episodes as we move forward.
Thank you so much. This has been my pleasure.
Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.